All right, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont. Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, before we get started, we got a few things to go over, but first I want to go to Jeff Cohen to talk about what's going on in the podcast. Jeff, what's going on with that pod? How you doing tonight?
All right, thank you, Bruce. Yes, baseball and BBQ on all your podcast apps. Yes, we have the great umpire Al Clark this week. He umpired the Earthquake World Series back in '89. He did Nolan Ryan's 300th game. He was at Cal Ripken's 21-31 game, and he also did some time in the federal penitentiary. He has an interesting story, so please check it out on baseball and BBQ on all your podcast apps.
That was a turn, Jeff. That was a turn. He did all these great games, and then he served time.
He served time, yes. And he's very, very open about it. Talk about it. Yep.
We are looking to have Al come in and do a presentation for us in the near future, and we hope we can get that scheduled for all of you. Now, Friday, May 30th, for all of us who are in our area geographically, we are going to the Nashua Silver Knights game. It's our first chapter social event, community outreach event of 2025, and you're invited. We'll be meeting in the parking lot at historic Holman Stadium in Nashua at 4:30 to set up our table and our display for the 6:03 game, answering fans' questions before, during, and after the game. It's a fireworks night, so we got a little bonus. And not to be outdone, scheduled event number 2 will take place Friday, July 25th, when we'll be heading down to Manchester and Delta Dental Stadium for the Eastern League tilt between the Fisher Cats and my former team, the Hartford Yard Goats. We'll do the same thing. We'll meet in the parking lot adjacent to the ballpark at 5 p.m. to set up our table and our display for 6:35, answering questions from the fans before, during, and after the game. This is also a fireworks night. The baseball gods are shining down upon us, so yet another bonus. Email me if you have any questions or you plan on attending. Stay tuned, because we might be scheduling another in-person event or two in the very near future. Next up, do you have friends or family members who would love SABR? Now is the time to encourage them to join as we kick off the SABR 500 Club membership drive. The SABR 500 Club is a referral-based membership drive with the goal of welcoming 500 new members now through April 30th, 2025. New members who sign up for an annual or multi-year membership during the referral period will receive a custom baseball card set featuring SABR Rucker archive images of members of the 500 Home Run Club. Current members who refer 3 or more new members during the drive, regardless of membership type, will receive their choice of a card set or a SABR logo lapel pin. For more information, go to sabr.org/500club or email me directly for details at bruce@brucemcclurenh.com. All right. Now let's get on to our feature presentation. A large part of baseball's early success, including the 1876 formation of the National League, was due to William Hulbert, president of the Chicago team. Assisting him by promoting baseball in the press was his friend Lewis Meacham, a Vermont native and the sporting editor of the Chicago Daily Tribune. But Meacham did more than just quietly work behind the scenes. He went to countless games, and being an authority on baseball rules, occasionally helped umpires make decisions. He compiled player statistics for newspapers and sporting publications and co-edited with Albert Spalding the 1878 Spalding Baseball Guide. Upon Meacham's death in 1878, no fewer than 5 groups released laudatory resolutions in his honor. But with the accolades came criticisms. A newspaper in his beloved Vermont wrote after his death, "Like many another brilliant man, he was somewhat erratic, and his eccentricities had a tendency to keep him from assuming the position which his talents would naturally entitle him to occupy." Still are nagging questions which have baffled even professional genealogists about Meacham's birth date, birthplace, middle name, alias, and even where he's buried. This presentation has answers to or theories about all of these inconsistencies. SABR member Jack Bales retired in 2020 as reference and humanities librarian emeritus after more than 40 years at the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Although a librarian by vocation, he is a writer by avocation and has published numerous works for books, journals, magazines, literary encyclopedias, and newspapers. His books include literary studies on American authors Horatio Alger Jr., Kenneth Roberts, Esther Forbes, and Southern author Willie Morris. And the memoir, My Dog, Skip, which was made into a popular motion picture. Jack has written articles on the Chicago Cubs for a variety of publications, including the Baseball Research Journal and Nine, a journal of baseball history and culture. And he is here tonight to give his presentation entitled The Mysterious Lewis Meacham, the untold story of William Hulbert's right-hand man, Jack Bales. Welcome to Northern New England. How are you this evening, Jack?
Thank you. I'm doing real well, Bruce. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for that fine introduction, too.
It's all yours.
Okay, I'm going to go to the slide sorter right now. Okay, we all set now? Okay. I got started on this project, first of all, while talking to MLB historian John Thorne at a SABR conference some years ago. And Lewis Meacham is mentioned here and there in his book, as well as in most baseball histories.
Pardon me, Jack, for just a moment. You are not sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm not. Okay, let me. Okay, can you, let me see then. I don't see where I can share it now.
You are a co-host, so you are able to share.
Yeah.
Down the bottom of the screen, there is a share button. Click that.
I don't see a share button down here, though. I'm looking down here. I shared it before.
Jack?
You can't do
Yeah.
that, Jack.
Yeah.
Type alternate S.
Oh, alternate S? Okay. No. No, that didn't.
Bear with us just a moment. We're sorry, folks.
Yeah.
Jack, are you on the screen and can you see me and Bruce and the rest
I
of
can see you, but I only see one at a time here.
All right, so if you can only see
Oh,
one
wait a
of-
minute. I just changed it. Now I can share the screen. I just changed the view here.
Okay.
Okay,
That's what I
now
was
it
about
should
to
be
tell you,
okay.
to change
Now
your
I'm
view.
doing this. Now I'm doing this, and it should be okay now.
Ta-da!
Yeah, okay. I just changed the view up there, and that did it. Now I'm going to do the slides shorter, and is that okay?
Yep, you are on slide 2.
Okay, everything okay with that?
Yep, works great. There
Okay,
you go.
Great. So
Thanks,
thanks
Jack.
very much, you all. Thanks, Molly. Yeah, I think I screwed up. I fiddled up with that view up there, and that's what did it. Okay, I got started on this project some years ago while talking to MLB historian John Thorne at a SABR convention, and I told him that I'd read his book, liked it, and that the Lewis Meacham was mentioned here and there, but there wasn't much in his book, and there wasn't much in most baseball histories, all the big ones. He was mentioned all of them, but not much was there. And he said that just was because not much was known about him. And that gave me something to think about. And in 2023, I'm kind of an active member of the SABR's 19th Century Committee, and I've given quite a few presentations for it and for Bob Bailey and Peter Mancuso. And I decided in 2023 to see what I could find on Lewis Meacham. And little did I know what the exasperating difficulties and strange circumstances and problems that lay in front of me. Now, as Bruce mentioned, William Hulbert, president of the Chicago White Stockings team now known as the Chicago Cubs, was a principal force behind the 1876 founding of the National League. And baseball histories all note that he was assisted by his friend, Lewis Meacham, a sports reporter and editor for the Chicago Daily Tribune. But besides Meacham's articles in the newspaper and his help promoting the National League, little is known about the man himself. And in almost all the baseball histories, they use the term that he was Hulbert's mouthpiece, one who supports and presents Hulbert's views. He was more than just that, though. And I found out that Meacham was widely respected during his journalism career. And as Bruce mentioned, when he died, no fewer than 5 organizations released laudatory resolutions in his honor. And also, as Bruce mentioned, with all the accolades, there are the few criticisms, including this one right here. This reporter wrote earlier in the article that he was a born newspaper writer, capable of filling creditably the highest position, and was a writer of great clearness and force. But he also said that he was erratic, and his eccentricities had a tendency to keep him from assuming the position which his talents would naturally entitle him to occupy. And by the way, he was the editor of this same newspaper at one time. So usually when someone dies, you expect something kind of nice about you to be printed, not in this case. But as you will find out, erratic and eccentric, he was almost like he had a double life, and erratic and eccentric, as I said, but maybe very near the mark. Records show he had 2 birthplaces, he had 2 birth dates, he had 2 burial locations, he had 2 entries in the popular website Find a Grave, both of which have errors, and even 2 names. Both Retro Sheet and Baseball Reference are incorrect. He fought in the Civil War, and I've come across 2 military ranks after serving in the Union Army, and even 2 terms of military service. And let's throw in some fictitious middle initials and some deliberate fabrications on his own part to screw up the biographical record. So this is what I had to start out with right here. Not surprisingly, I was mighty confused at this point, but gradually, with a lot of help from a lot of people, the pieces started gradually falling into place. And not only do I have answers to all these questions, but I have theories as to what contributed, to some of this misleading information that's out there. Now, here's a basic family tree for Lewis Meacham. I was kind of pleased I managed to figure this out in Microsoft Word, which, wasn't all that intuitive, but it kind of worked out okay. His grandfather and his uncle were both named Lewis. That's where he got his first name. His father, James, married twice. His first wife, Caroline, died in childbirth, and their son, Elias, lived just 15 months. And his marriage to Mary produced 2 children, Lewis and Emma, as you can see. Okay, kind of a small family. One thing I wanted to emphasize was that the Meacham family they were really big guns in Vermont, very well known in Vermont. James Meacham was born in Rutland, went to Middlebury, went to seminary, was ordained as a Congregationalist minister. He served as pastor of the New Haven Congregational Church until 1846. He was then elected to Congress, member of the Whig Party, and served in Congress from 1849 to his death in 1856. His son, Lewis Henry Meacham, was born in New Haven, Vermont on March 8, 1846. He was at Middlebury College for his freshman year. And note that his middle name, he was staying in room 7 of Starr Hall. That's what the SH is there for. Note that his middle name is listed here, and this is one of the very, very few times I ever saw his middle name listed. It was never Lewis H. 99% of the time, it was just Lewis Meacham. And this middle name is important, which is why I'm stressing it. From 1864 to 65, and that's important too. He served in the Civil War for just 1 year, which I'll get into later. He was then back at Middlebury for 2 years, then went to Amherst College in the fall of 1867, though he only stayed the 1 year and is listed in college directories as a non-graduate of the class of 1869. He was a member of Delta Kappa Epsilon fraternity as he was at Middlebury. He began his journalism career in 1869. He was a proofreader on the old Chicago Times newspaper. He went to the Chicago Tribune, where he's a proofreader and then a reporter. He inherited quite a bit of money in the fall of 1872, which he unwisely and unsuccessfully invested in 2 businesses. He returned to journalism. By December 1873, he was editor of the Rutland paper, and he became a member of a newly organized baseball club. Now, Meacham was interested in baseball, but he also got involved in politics. As I said, his father, James Meacham, served as a congressman, and in July 1874, Lewis was elected secretary of a Republican town caucus. His purpose was to select delegates for a state congressional convention. He was an up-and-coming politician. It seemed that in October, local newspapers were praising him as the one who had, as you can see here, the inside track to be elected secretary of the Vermont Senate. But just 2 days after this article appeared, newspapers reported they had suddenly withdrawn his name as a candidate. 2 months later, he resigned from the Rutland Herald, went back to Chicago in the spring of '75, returned to the Tribune, and by the summer he was the paper's baseball editor, the baseball's reporter, and he soon became the Tribune's sports editor. He received high praise, as this article points out, for he seemed to have, quote, a special aptitude for newspaper work, and he did it, quote, unusually well. Just a second here. It wasn't all praise, however. On October 1, he went from the sidelines to the ball field as he tried his hand at umpiring. It was a game between the White Stockings and the St. Louis Brown Stockings, which Chicago won 13-9. It was his only attempt at umpiring, according to Retro Sheet. And as you can see here, it did not go particularly well, but with Meacham's quote unquote laughable errors. He may have been William Hulbert's so-called mouthpiece and right-hand man, but he certainly did not hesitate to speak his mind, and he could be quite critical, both of the men of the White Stockings on the ball field and other players too, but also how Hulbert performed his duties as club president. In mid-September 1876, for example, he complained that the team owner was less than forthright at when reporters asked him questions about the lineup for 1876, like which players had been off in contracts for the following year. And note that Meacham even had the nerve to comment in print to toss in a jab about Hulbert's weight and his, quote, well-fed body. As I said, the players themselves were on the receiving end too. After one game with that the White Stockings played, Meacham pointed out that, quote, the White Stockings yesterday out-batted their opponents and then lost the game by their incredible muffing. But Meacham had other things to keep him busy. Newspapers covered his baseball articles, game day accounts, and more. He often traveled with the Chicago team, sometimes helped umpires interpret rules, and he supplied baseball statistics to a number of publications, like the New York Clipper, a well-known sports and entertainment publication, and Albert Spalding's well-known newspaper guide as well. Spalding was one of the best pitchers of his day and was a player for the Chicago White Stockings. He was also the team's secretary and owner of a baseball emporium in Chicago that furnished sports equipment to athletes. The Spalding Company is still in existence today, headquartered in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And about this time, Meacham and about 60 other men, he was really on the go, Meacham was. He really did a lot of things in Chicago. He met to form a group that eventually be called the Sons of Vermont. He said that it occurred to him and a few others who had moved from Vermont to Chicago that they should all meet informally, get together, exchange stories, give talks, sponsor talks, which would always be followed by informal discussions. He was a speaker at several of these as well. Eventually be called the Sons of Vermont. Now, newspapers in '76 covered more of Meacham's activities. Here he helped an umpire make a decision in the game between Boston and the Indianapolis Blues. They were called homeless because in the fall of that year, the directors found that the team was in $2,500 in debt. There was no money to pay the players, and none to sign them for the next year. In fact, the team folded that year, which is why they were called homeless. And the White Stockings were playing the Grays in nearby Providence at just about that time, which is probably why Meacham happened to be present here in Boston. I discovered, this is all brand new here, that He was not only a sports reporter, but he was also an investigative journalist. He had written articles exposing confidence men and swindlers in Chicago. And one of the individuals, a man named Joe Coons, accosted Meacham in a courtroom and struck him across his face with a cowhide, that is, a leather whip. The reporter promptly knocked him down, and Meacham, who weighed some 230 pounds, tried to sit on him, but instead he tripped and fell. Coons then pulled out a revolver and tried to shoot him, but then was stopped by persons in the courtroom, including the judge, and then he was taken to jail. Not very smart to pull a gun in a crowded courtroom with the judge right there helping out your opponent. And I did some checking, and sure enough, the Tribune did indeed feature articles about Coons and his shenanigans, as well as an article about some of the other people Meacham investigated. In this case, Coons would purchase items from distributors and not pay for them. So Meacham asked Coons for some references in his business dealings, and Coons gave those to him. And Meacham checked them out, found out they were all unsatisfactory, and he had no hesitation in publishing this information about the man's crooked behavior in the Tribune. So at this point, everything was going well for Meacham. He was 32 years old at this time. As the Chicago Inter-Ocean newspaper put it, at this point he was, quote, in the very prime of manhood. He did have some health problems, though, and he was quite often had stomach pains. And on Tuesday morning, October 1, 1878, while working on an assignment, he began to feel ill. He went home and soon felt sharp pains in his stomach. His doctor gave him some morphine pills and hypodermic injections, and he felt better for the rest of the day and the evening. At about 10:30 the next morning, he was offered a glass of wine, which he drank, but then felt better for quite a while, but then fell on his bed in his room on Dearborn Street in Chicago, and he died. The cause of death was biliary colic, which this was an ache in the abdomen, which occurs when a gallstone blocks the bile duct. And this is a tube that drains the bile from the gallbladder to the small intestine. This can lead to serious complications such as an infection in the gallbladder or in the bile ducts or in the liver. And Meacham's attending physician said that it certainly didn't help matters, and his death was accelerated by heart disease. Meacham was survived by his mother and his younger sister, Emma. The flag on the Chicago grounds the next day was lowered to half-mast. His seat in the reporter's stand was draped in mourning. The players on the field on October 2nd wore strips of ribbon around their arms to show their respect. And as Bruce mentioned, soon after his death, no fewer than 5 groups of people released resolutions in his honor. There was a Chicago Baseball Club, part of which is shown here. The National League did one. His newspaper colleagues released one. An organization of Union Civil War veterans released one, and also the Sons of Vermont, his social fraternity. In 1879, Spalding's Baseball Guide reprinted the National League's resolution. He had 8 pallbearers. William Hulbert was one, Spalding was one, and the rest were all reporters from Chicago. Oh, and there was 2 persons representing the Sons of Vermont. Okay, now we start getting what drove me crazy. In the obituaries, I noticed this. What's with the middle initials of E, B, and S? In fact, I've seen Tribune articles with one article was an E and one article was a B. Maybe it was both E and S. I can't remember now. But as I said, this is engraved in granite. His name was Lewis Henry Meacham, with Henry being the name of his maternal uncle. And these initials all started with the Chicago obituary, so they were not used before his death. In fact, I usually saw just his first and his last name, as I mentioned before. Henry was very, very occasionally used, but never just an H. Take a look at Retro Sheet and the Baseball Reference. They both have the middle initial S, as you can see, in his full name. They're on the top line of Retro Sheet, and they're on the second line from the bottom in Baseball Reference. Both birth dates are incorrect there on the second line. He was born on March 8th, not March 4th. Retro Sheet said he was buried at Middlebury. No, that is incorrect too. Baseball Reference got it right with Oakwoods Cemetery. Sorry. I thought find a grave might help, but as you can see, it's not find a grave, it's find two graves. Okay, Lewis Henry Meacham's right at the top there. Up at the top there, his birth date is correct, his name is correct, but it says he was buried at Middlebury. Not correct at all. Second entry, Lewis B. Meacham. There was no B. His birth date's incorrect of 1845, but they did get his burial right at Oakwoods. Up the grave marker at the upper right is from the marker there in Middlebury. And that is all correct right there. That's all correct. Now, I thought Meacham's death certificate might help, but it too had errors. Look at that middle initial again there on the top line, Lewis S. Lewis S comes up a lot. In the second line there, it says he was age 33. Nope, he was age 32. And by the way, the age of 33 also appears on his burial casket on a brass plate. Bears the inscription, died October 2nd, 1878, Lewis Meacham, age 33 years. And also at the bottom line, his place of birth is incorrect, saying it was Middlebury. Good friend of mine is a professional genealogist, a former library colleague, and she told me that in all her work, she constantly sees variations in middle initials, ages, birth dates, death dates, etc. She said, quote, many times a variation is a result of someone's wrong interpretation of poor handwriting, maybe that of a census enumerator or a county clerk or even a newspaper reporter. And she emphasized it's really not unusual at all. As I said, the one thing I verified is correct is his name, Lewis Henry Meacham. But as you can see, obituaries vary as to birth year and age, but I found March 8, 1846 in quite a few reliable sources. Then I started out, how do I make sense of all this? And I was doing research all over the place, and a lot of primary sources and secondary sources. And my first step was to contact the Vermont Genealogy Library in Essex Junction, Vermont. And I came across references to that. And those of you living in New England, man, this place is just, it's really wonderful. They really know their stuff really well. You got to be, the New England people have to be proud of that place. And one of the staff members told me that this whole Meacham project was, quote, very interesting, especially for a few of our researchers who are baseball fanatics. They just love tackling this project. In fact, the lead researcher on my project is a professional genealogist and the current editor of the journal, Vermont Genealogy. That's the name of the journal. And he was, I was told, one of the, quote, foremost experts on Vermont genealogy. So you can see I was in good hands here. And the researchers corroborated what my genealogist friend had already told me, that that back then there were no birth certificates. And I found this out, unfortunately, but you know, in my research. And churches were the repositories of birth records. And I was pleased when they told me, quote, you have done much of what we suggest to do with this problem. And one problem I cleared up rather easily. Some sources easily. Some sources say that Meacham was born in Middlebury, and some say New Haven. The Vermont Library sent me information from this book, which I did not know about at all, which confirmed that Reverend Meacham was ordained in 1838 and left the New Haven, Vermont church on September 10th, 1846. And he and his family then moved to Middlebury as he had accepted a teaching position at Middlebury College. And by the way, note all those D's for dismissed. You know, I thought there might have been something irregular going on, but I found out that this just means that they left the position. I saw teachers being dismissed, they got another job. People retired, they were still listed as being dismissed. They had the D by their name. It just meant that they left their jobs. But as you can see, with Reverend Meacham being the pastor in New Haven from 1838 to September 1846, it is unlikely that his son was born in Middlebury in the March of 1846 because the family just was not living in Middlebury at that time. And the researchers all recommended that I contact the New Haven church and ask about birth records, and I did. I offered to pay for someone to do it, but they never responded to my letters and my emails, unfortunately. But, you know, that's the way it goes. So, where was he buried? And this took a lot of time, I'm afraid. Now here's a family memorial in Middlebury. So I contacted I contacted a person who was an expert in the cemetery, and this person referred me to this woman named Eva Garcelin Hart, who was an extremely helpful archivist at the Henry Sheldon Museum in Middlebury. And she told me that even though Lewis is included on the cemetery, on the memorial, and in her copy of the cemetery index, quote, there is no guarantee that he is actually buried there, unquote. And she told me that his maternal aunt, Emma, is on the headstone here, but he is not even listed in the index. So, but again, I found out this is not unusual. The grave memorial could have been what they call a cenotaph, a monument erected in honor of the family, but they all didn't have to be buried here. My next step was to contact the Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago, and I got this note in reply, you know, hooray, he's buried there in Chicago. I was pleased to verify the burial, though it not occurred to me that there might not be a headstone. By digging around with more Google searches, I discovered, well, how about a historical society in the area? And I found out that members of Chicago's Hyde Park Historical Society are studying the cemetery to, quote, learn about the people and events that influence our community over the decades. So I contacted the society. I said, hey, would anybody be able to check out a few things at the Oakwood Cemetery with Lewis Meacham's gravestone? And as it turned out, one Mallory Price immediately responded to my email said she was very familiar with the cemetery, especially with that part of it, and she said she would be glad to do so. And here's part of her reply. Meacham is buried on lot 208, and there are markers for 204 and what appears to be 206 and a half. But unfortunately, his grave marker is not visible. As you can see here, she says that a lot of the graves were simply covered up over the years and ignored. So she found these markers close to the ground, but that was about it. And she also sent me this picture, which shows the general area of the cemetery where Meacham is buried. So let's regroup a little bit here. Here's that slide from the beginning in which I had laid out some of the problems I encountered. Note that we can now fill in some of the gaps. More than 2 birthdays? Yeah, there were, but March 8th, 1846 is correct. 2 birthplaces? Not anymore. He was born in New Haven. 2 burial locations? Well, born in Chicago. Buried in Chicago. Now, I think it was Bob Bailey at the 19th Century Committee asked, well, couldn't he have been moved from Chicago to Middlebury? And I said, yeah, and I found a very obscure article in the Tribune that said that some uncle was going to move his grave from Chicago to Middlebury. But that was, maybe when he gets around to it in the spring or something like that. But I found no reference to that any time around. It could have happened, but I found no record to it. There's nothing in Middlebury either. 2 entries at Find a Grave, both of those have errors. Okay, that's where we are right now. We have a Civil War service to get into, and that would be the final thing. And then I want to touch upon his name and initials again. And the Civil War service really drove me crazy as well. Okay, this Amherst directory says that Meacham was a private and was promoted to lieutenant in the Civil War, and that he served for 3 years. Well, good old Lewis supplied this information, and guess what? It's wrong. Some sources say he served for 1 year, correct. And he mustered out as a corporal, correct. Even worse, I checked military indexes and could find no official record of his military service at all. He was not there. All these Civil War people I know who are experts in Civil War history, they said, Jack, just check this, just check that. I said, I did, and did. He's not listed. But then I came across this webpage. Meacham was in the 186th New York Infantry Regiment, and on May 30th, 1865, he was transferred to New York's 79th Infantry, also known as the Highlanders. He was mustered out as a corporal on July 4th, 1865. He served for 1 year, but look, he enlisted as Lewis M. Shattuck. And there was our mystery. And more to this, of course. Now, this is from Lewis Shattuck's discharge papers. It notes his day of enlistment. It indicates he was to serve for 3 years, but instead he served less than 1 year and leaving the military with a rank of corporal. And that sums up things rather nicely right there. Okay. I'm sorry. I meant to go back here and say something else about here. This document says he left the service as a corporal and not as a lieutenant, and it adds that both he and his company were mustered out, that he did not leave the service early due to sickness or injuries. And this is from his discharge papers. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. It notes his day of enlistment in these papers here on August 2nd. And it indicates he was to serve for 3 years, but instead he served for less than 1 year, leaving the military with the rank of corporal. Okay. Listed on August 2nd, 64. He was served for 3 years, but he discharged on July 4th, serving 1 year. Old Lewis was kind of a scoundrel here. In November 66, he was a student at Middlebury College. He filled out an application for a $100 Civil War bounty. The United States Equalization Act of 1866 provided this sum to all honorably discharged soldiers who had served for at least 3 years. But remember, he served for 1 year. That's cut etched in granite, so to speak. In fact, less than 1 year. So in other words, he misrepresented his Civil War service so he could get this $100, but I guess he got. And these Civil War fabrications would crop up over the years in published sources. I love this one. Here he admits that he and Shattuck are one and the same. The second line from the top entry there. He was the identical Lewis M. Shattuck, who was enlisted as a private in Company K. He was 20 years old, which verifies the March 8, 1846 birth date. And he admits that he left the Army with a rank of corporal. So that kind of really kind of clears up a lot of things for me, where those arrows are. Okay. Okay. Of course, though, the big question is, and this kind of drove me crazy, and I had to find this out. You know, if I'm going to do a decent job with this, I got to find out where the name Shattuck came from. So then it suddenly dawned on me. Well, I went through all the college catalogs, and but when he was in school, and I discovered that Meacham and one George Shattuck were both freshmen together at Middlebury College there at the same time. And I also discovered that they were both students at Amherst. And here are their college years. Remember that Meacham's Middlebury enrollment was interrupted by his Civil War year. He was then back in Middlebury for 2 years, and he and Shattuck undoubtedly knew each other, perhaps both before and after Meacham's year in the military. He had not graduated from Amherst, as I said before. He was a non-graduate of the class of 1869. He and Shattuck were both students in 1867, though. So depending upon when the school years, ended and started, they may have overlapped for a time. Here are brief biographies from an Amherst directory. And once again, there are all these fabrications there that I've marked at the top. He says there that he was a private and a first lieutenant, and that he served from 62 to 65. Wrong, 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 wrong. And note that his Middlebury college years of 63 to 64 and 65 to 67 are not there, because that would have conflicted with his so-called years in the military. So he filled this out. This was his doing. And over the years, he supplied this information to a lot of directories, but it was simply not true at all. And by the way, look at line number 4 there. He was not a tutor for the Union Christian College in Merrim, Indiana. It says he was a tutor there. He was not. He taught mathematics for 5 weeks in early 1868, though the Vermont newspapers praised him for being appointed a full-time professor, which prompted the president of the college to issue a widespread public denial in all of the newspapers in Vermont at that time, which made me wonder if Meacham himself turned something into the newspapers, seeing all his contacts with the newspapers, informing him that he was a full-time college professor rather than a tutor for 5 weeks. Or excuse me, not a tutor, but teaching mathematics for 5 weeks. George Shattuck, as you can see, was a medical doctor. I lucked out here. Many years after Meacham's death, a representative from Phillips Academy contacted Middlebury College for biographical information for a directory, and someone located Meacham's sister Emma. His aunt Emma is on the cenotaph, the memorial, but this is his sister Emma, who in 1910 supplied this paragraph. Men had to be 18 to enlist, so Meacham was not underage when he signed up. And recruiters often paid no attention to age anyway, especially in 1864 when the Union was desperate for men. In fact, a Civil War historian here in Fredericksburg, I was at the Visitor Center for the Battle of Fredericksburg, and he told me that sometimes these Civil War recruiters have a great big 18 on a piece of paper. They put it on the ground and they said, okay, stand on it. Okay, you're over 18, you're good enough to enlist. Note his sister's comments about him being lieutenant in the war. Wrong. No, this all started with Meacham himself. And as far as from him being taken prisoner at Bull Run, well, he was a member of the 79th Infantry. They fought at both battles of Bull Run, but they were in 1861 and 1862, and he enlisted in 1864. I could not confirm that he was captured by the Confederates. I highly doubt it. I never saw it in any real source, or having contracted the disease, so he did have stomach problems. And by the way, I contacted that Chicago Historical Society, and that Mallory Price responded. I contacted the Middlebury College archives. This woman, Caitlin Burrs, was very, very helpful. Both those young women were extremely helpful. As was that archivist there at the other place, the Sheldon Museum. They really, and they were very much interested in this too. Now, I found out, and I'm no Civil War historian whatsoever, but I found out we may think it's unusual for a person people to change their names like this, but it really wasn't unusual at all. For instance, some wanted to avoid angry comments from people on the other side, maybe family members on the other side, friends on the other side. They did not want family and friends to worry about. But this is the only source I found that made mention of him running away to enlist. And that's certainly possible. And I talked to some Civil War historians, and I did some thinking myself. And there are some feasible reasons for his enlistment. Now, Lewis came from a very prominent family. They were high cotton in Vermont, as they say. And his father, James, was a member of Congress. James' brother was a Vermont state senator, is very politically connected family, perhaps concerned about his welfare, could have used their context to prevent him from joining up in Vermont. So his running away to enlist and changing his name seems quite plausible. Remember, Lewis was in politics, and he dropped out abruptly from a state Senate race. Maybe he was tired of living in his father's and his family's very political shadow. He did not want to follow in their footsteps. Maybe he wanted to get rid of the family name and do something on his own where he would not be identified with his family, hence all those embellishments too, making a kind of improving himself, so to speak. Stolen glory, as they say nowadays. For that matter, he could have felt inferior to his family. All these people were doing all these neat things in politics. Here he lost all his money in these two failed businesses. That could have had something to do with it too. In light of, he wanted to maybe prove himself, stand out from the others at the risk of exaggerating his accomplishments. That's also a possibility. And let's go back here to that infamous obituary notice, which talks about his eccentricities and a tendency to keep him from assuming the position that he was entitled to. This is from the newspaper Meacham himself tried to edit, so you would think it was would all be possible. Complimentary. But in 1872, he inherited all this money. He blew it. He started a brush factory in Burlington, Vermont. Did not go well. He went out west to raise sheep. He knew nothing about raising sheep. Lost his money there. He apparently had no head for business, so he came back here, perhaps embarrassed, to work on his hometown local newspaper. Maybe this reporter knew about his failed businesses, maybe his Civil War embellishments, and he wrote this obituary because of that. I'm just grasping at straws here. Or maybe he could have had an axe to grind with Meacham himself. I tried very hard to find a photograph. I tried all over to find a photograph of Meacham, but there was one of his sidekick here, George Shattuck, in the Middlebury archives. So let's go back and regroup again. Okay, we've solved some of our problems here. Two names besides Lewis Henry Meacham, one name with the sort of middle initials, all wrong. One name used in the Civil War, I guess we'd call that an alias. Two Civil War ranks, he was decidedly a corporal. Two terms of service in the Civil War, he decidedly served for 1 year. So we've solved our problems. One final note. I discussed my research problems with genealogists at the Vermont Genealogy Library, and who was very helpful before. They found this really fascinating, they told me. One of them said that in terms of these errors on newspaper obituaries, most of these mistakes could be made for what he called sloppy reporting, the careless work of the persons who wrote the obituaries to begin with. And looking at the errors in Meacham's obituaries, he said, quote, "I've never seen such a variety before as in this case. My evaluation is this is indeed sloppy reporting." Let's go back to baseball now. I've said many positive things about Lewis Meacham, and his presence in baseball circles notwithstanding. When on the job, he still functioned as Hulbert's mouthpiece. He was not one to rock the National League boat, and the Tribune articles reflect the league's philosophy and politics. Furthermore, he did not hesitate to help Meacham exploit situations to the team's owner's advantage. I went to the Chicago History Museum, used to be called the Chicago Historical Society, and I've gone through the Hulbert papers, the Red Sox Hulbert papers quite a few times, and I went there looking for Meacham material and found this letter here. After the Cincinnati Red Stockings they were just staggering under formidable debt. They temporarily disbanded in June 1877, so Hulbert sent Meacham to Cincinnati to sign players Jimmy Hallinan and Charlie Jones for Chicago. You know, the team was disbanded, but they were, rather unethically. They went in there to kind of swoop in and grab the players and to give he told him to give Albert Spalding full particulars. And naturally, this did not go over well in Cincinnati, and the New York Clipper reprinted an article from the Cincinnati Enquirer that took both Hulbert and Meacham to task for what they considered decidedly unethical behavior. Meacham, the paper said, was accused of selfishness, as you can see here, and also acting dishonorably to come to town when Cincinnati was facing financial ruin and help Herbert by pirating away its best players, as the line there in the middle of the text says. I've expanded this talk for a lengthy essay for SABR's bio project, and I gave the link to various people who've helped me. And I was really pleased. And kind of one of my rules is kind of thank people for. I do a lot of research and writing. I did a couple books on the Cubs, and besides many articles, and I always help by so many good people. And Mallory Price, the one in Chicago, went to the cemetery. She got all excited about this. So now she got someone at the University of Chicago who's interested in the cemetery, and they want to work with cemetery officials to uncover the graves in that area and make all that area nice again. And she really wants us maybe uncover Meacham's grave and send me a photograph of it. And the one at the Middlebury, Caitlin Bears, she just loved getting the link to the article, and she sent the link to all the people at the library. Said, "Look, I'm in a scholarly essay here. I cited both their names in the footnotes. I'm cited in this. See footnote number 54 or whatever. I'm cited here," and that kind of made my day too. You kind of like to help these. They were both young. Wanted to go up in their profession as librarians, and I kind of hope I helped them out a little bit, because they really, really helped them out. And that, as I said, that kind of made my day here. One last item: C. Orrick Bishop was a board of directors of the St. Louis Brown Stockings. In late 1875, William Hulbert wrote him about the proposed new baseball league and how Meacham and the Tribune supported both the league and these teams out west. And in the letter, Hulbert notes that, quote, "I am sure we can trust Meacham." Well, they may be able to trust him if they ask him about baseball or maybe about raising sheep, but if they ask him about his early life, or they ask him, "Hey, Lewis, what'd you do in the Civil War?" I hope they took his comments with a grain of salt, or maybe an entire box, if you get my drift. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
There were more twists and turns in that presentation than I could actually hang on to.
I know it.
I
Yeah.
mean, there was a joke years ago in the old Sons of Sam Horn message board. There were more twists and turns in that story that would make Dostoevsky weak in the knees and have to steady himself in the furniture or something like
Yeah.
that. I thought it was a
Yeah.
funny
Well, funny you
line
said
that
that.
stayed with me for years. It almost reminds me of Mad Men and Don Draper's.
Draper, yeah.
Yeah, gosh. I don't. Wow, I don't even know where to begin with that. So I'm going to turn around and say, if you have a question for our presenter Jack Bales tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. You'll find another button that says raise hand. Raise your hand, and we will get you in line to ask Jack Bales some questions tonight. We've got some hands up already. Let's go to our first one. Molly, you're up. Go.
So you talked about name confusion and how things were messed up, and I've actually lived that.
Really?
My biological mother and I have birth dates that are about a week apart, and our initials are the same.
Oh, yeah.
So we would get mail, for example, my birth mother's maiden name is my middle name.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes her mail would be with her real middle name, and sometimes it would be with my name and my middle name, or the other way around.
That's interesting. So yeah, it happened to you too then. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not you know, it was, I mean, it happened for many years.
Yeah. I hope it's over with now.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, it's over, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, obviously I had a proper birth certificate, you know, all of that was properly recorded in the city of Hartford, Connecticut, not Vermont. And everything was recorded, but it's just that I was named after her grandma, who was a Mary, but they put me down as a Molly,
Yeah.
and my mother's name was Marita. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
all got recorded, you know, and it somehow between all of that, it was Marita Fagan and then my maiden name McHugh, and I'm Molly Fagan McHugh, and it all just got mixed up.
Wow. Okay. I see. Yeah.
And at this point, I don't even know who I'm married to.
I know. I was just going to say that, Bruce. I was just thinking of that. Yeah.
I'm completely
right.
confused.
Yeah.
I one of the things I wanted to ask you was, do you think any you had touched on a lot of what you might believe to be the reasons why Meacham had all of these inconsistencies in his history. When he was alive, do you feel as though it was completely intentional to have a lot of this inconsistency to create an air of mystery or to just hide?
I do. And here's something else. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but and I mentioned this to people, but you know, the middle initials were B, E, and S. You know, his pallbearers were all reporters, and this only occurred after his death. And he knew all the reporters in Chicago. Maybe he contacted with them. Hey, screw up my middle name in the obituaries. They may have known about all these inconsistencies. And one of the middle initials was S. That stood for Shattuck. One of them was E. That stood for uh, E. The first name of his brother who died in childbirth, and his brother's middle initial was B, and that was one of the initials that Meacham could have used too. And this is totally off the wall, I know, but the thought did occur to me because all these things going around in here, you know, and maybe they just got together and said, we're going to pull, or maybe they thought of themselves, we're going to pull a fast one on him now that he's dead, because it only appeared and only in Chicago. No, not only in Chicago obituaries, because some of these were on wire servers, but it all started with Chicago obituaries. And that's it.
Geez. Hey, Joe Ross, how you doing?
I was doing fine until I got all confused there.
I'll tell you what, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to go back and rewatch this a couple of times to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Go.
Well,
Jack, great program.
thank you very much.
A lot of work, and it's one of those things that you could have spent, if you spent more time, maybe you'd find more inconsistencies about it.
Yes, I know you're right about that.
I got
Could
the
have.
impression that when you talk about the Civil War service and that sort of thing, maybe he was just bragging.
That could have been too. Yeah, I know. I hadn't thought about that. Just bragging, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, he had an inferior. Maybe had an. I said maybe he wanted to. Well, I might have had an inferiority complex with his family being so socially prominent. Well, here I'm going to brag about this, and I did all these nice things.
He embellished a little bit.
Yeah.
The question I have, however, and you may have answered it and I just missed it. Did you check with the family Bible, which is where they used to put all the births?
No, I did not, and I did not. In fact, I did not track down. I got some stuff in Ancestry, of course, and and I there's many Meacham relatives, and there were quite a few people listed there, but I did not pursue that angle, and I probably should have. And I have to admit, though, at that point, I was just kind of want to get it down as much as I could.
Can't say I
And-
blame you.
Yeah, because it was getting kind of confusing.
The family Bible, the reason I mentioned it is the family
Yeah.
Bible, of course, is contemporaneous with what
Yeah.
happened.
I may go
And
back to
probably
Ancestry
would
and
be
try
the
to track
most
it down.
accurate.
Yeah, because the family's probably still around in Middlebury, and I could probably do that. And that's a good thought. I may pursue this a little bit. Thank you for the suggestion. One quick point I wanted to make. You know, I showed those two screens where I kind of gave the problems, and in red, I listed the solutions to all of them. I do a lot of a lot of these talks for the 19th Century Committee, and I'm good friends with my history colleagues there at Mary Washington, and I always run them by the student class beforehand to see what their reaction is. And they all love this, but they said, Mr. Bales, we can't keep track of this. Why don't you have a little slide listing these problems that you can go back with and say, here's what I found, here's what I found, here's what I found. So they gave me that idea. And I liked it so much I did it in halves, First half, I summed it all up. Then the second half at the end, I summed up the Civil War things. And so I know you guys were confused, but I think that might be confused, but I think that at least helped, bring it all together at the end.
I might have missed it, but did you discuss or can you discuss how you became interested in Meacham in his life?
Well, just from reading these and all my baseball research, I like to focus on things that have never been really much talked about before. And for example, that Tinker to Everest a Chance poem, it said it appeared on X date. 100% of the records said it appeared on X date. But I looked up, and then the publication that was in the New York Evening Mail, that was on a Sunday, and the paper wasn't published on a Sunday. So I got the microfilm and went back and found out that the correct date, in fact, Sports Illustrated even mentioned this after I published an article about it in 9, and I like to focus on things that nobody really ignored before. And then and the Billy Jervis shooting of the Cub by his foreign girlfriend, I consulted with his relatives and his nephew, and I wrote a nice little book about that.
I was
And so
about to
then
say, yeah.
well, yeah, you have it, Bruce. Yeah, and then while reading John Thorne's book, Meacham's name came up. I said, "Where's there's no more about it." So I wanted to do something that no one else has been done before. Is exactly right. Like, do we need any more books on Abraham Lincoln? Do we need any more books on George Washington? Well, nothing was known about Lewis Meacham. In fact, maybe he doesn't warrant that much. But I found out he was a pretty decent journalist in his own right, and he did help Meacham, did help Hulbert. So that's what kind of led me to start researching.
We might have to have you back to do a presentation on that book too.
Yeah,
Dixie
yeah.
Tarango.
Yeah, right.
Go get him, my man. How you doing, Dix?
I'm doing fine, Jack. It was a great report. I love investigative reporting like that,
Thank you, Dixie.
especially of people that we have no business knowing anything about.
Right.
And now we do.
Now we do. Thank you very much.
I think it's a good thing he didn't live 10 or 20 more years, because you'd really have a problem then.
Oh, I know it. Yeah. My big thing is I wish I could find a photograph of him, and I've checked archives and everything else. I've newspapers.com, everything. I just couldn't find anything. But
Well,
I haven't given up.
Photographs are tough.
Yeah, I checked SABR, checked everything, but I haven't given up. In fact, of all my research projects, this is my favorite one because it's just we knew nothing before, and everything out there was wrong. Oh, by the way, I did contact RetroSheet and Baseball Reference, and they said they'd correct those things too. Bob Bailey and Peter Mancuso of the 19th Century Committee gave me the contact information, so I corrected that.
2 small points.
Yeah.
I'm an ex-proofreader, so I notice these things.
So am I. I'm a proofreader
on your
too.
second slide,
Yeah.
there is a wayward S on it. For no reason, there's an S, the letter S, and it has
Really?
no business being there. So you might want to look into that and see if you can get rid of it, because it has no point. The second slide on the bottom.
Oh my God, I see it there.
Ah!
All the times I've looked, good Lord, I see it there.
That's what proofreaders do.
I know. That just makes me feel awful. That just
Oh,
ruins my
stop.
day, Dixie. Ruins my day,
That's
the second
also
thing-
why you can't edit your own material.
Material,
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, just out of curiosity's sake, did you ever find out the demise of George Shattuck?
Oh,
Yeah, he did that one. He died. Was it tuberculosis? Maybe I can't remember. But that one slide with the directory of in Amherst, it did say how he died and everything and when he died. I didn't really pay too much attention to it, but yeah, it does have them all listed there, and it's all readily available. too. Let me go back to that slide here and I can take a look at it. Can't.
It's sort of the last loose end being tied up.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah, got
While
a
he is
typhoid fever. Typhoid malarial fever.
Okay,
Yeah.
great
I should
stuff.
have mentioned that in my talk, by the way. I should have. I'll do that if I do this again.
and you should see on the screen the Chicago Cubs Shot for Love. That
yeah.
is
Yes,
Jack's book, A Showgirl's Crime of Passion in the 1932
Great book.
series.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah.
It has the endorsement of Karen Holleran, and that is
Yeah,
all
right.
you need to know
Yeah, right.
is that Karen Holleran loved it. And you're up, Karen. Go.
Well,
Yeah.
the only thing, I was just gonna make a comment. Everything is so screwed up with this guy. The only thing it seems like is real is he died.
He died. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Which consequently would mean that the other thing that's real about him is that he was born.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. You got
So,
two things.
but
He was born
nothing
and
in the
died.
middle is true. We have no idea. He is the Don Draper of early baseball.
Baseball. Right.
Yes,
Mhm.
I mean, those are the only things you can figure are basically real.
Hey, Steve Klugman, save me. You're up, man. Unmute, brother. Go down to the bottom of the screen, bottom left, and hit the audio button.
I'm sorry.
There you are.
Thank you. And thank you, Bruce. I'm from New York, the Casey Stengel chapter, casting a wide net on these things. They're terrific. I've been to a bunch of them, and I appreciate it.
We love the Casey Stengel
Jack,
chapter.
a
I'm glad
couple
you're here.
things. The 79th New York. Pardon me?
We love the Casey Stengel chapter. We're glad you're
Understand.
here.
Anyway. The 79th Regiment,
Yeah.
or the 79th Highland Regiment, I put this briefly in the was the only kilted regiment in United States history.
Really?
And they have a lot of historical detail. It used to be at the New York Historical. I bet a lot of it's online now. And since you're always looking to dig further, it sounds like you might find about something about whether he was
That's
really
right.
there
I'll
or
make a
not.
note of that, as a matter of fact. Yeah, because a lot of this stuff is online. Yeah, for sure.
But it was an all-volunteer, I'll say elite regiment. I don't know if they were elite militarily, but they viewed themselves as quite separate and special. And I think Abraham Lincoln signed something that said they could work killed.
Yeah. Okay.
One other thing that I wonder if you ran across any of this. He's a little too old for this, but one of the things that puzzled me as somebody who reads a lot about 19th century baseball is what happened to the Massachusetts game. In the 1850s, the Massachusetts game, as I understand it, was the game in New England. And after the Civil War, it just kind of disappeared. And John Thorne has written, well, I think played, but also watched recreations of the Massachusetts game. And it's a better game. It's more exciting. It's more fun. Yeah. But I don't know what happened, except it got out promoted. And I had the opportunity to, on a Zoom call, to ask questions of John. And I asked him that question, what happened? It must be more than it was better. I have a couple theories myself, but nobody really knows. I'm just wondering whether he ran into them. He would have probably played that or seen it as a youth while he was up in Vermont.
Vermont, yeah. That's a good question, Dave. I don't really know, but that's a great question.
Let me just throw
Brian
one more thing
McClanahan.
in about the variation.
Go ahead, Steve. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And stuff.
What's that, Steve?
Go ahead. You got more. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I
Some
stepped
people
on
are
you.
just like that. No, I'm just saying some people, they like to change the dates and times and names and things and, kind of see what happens and see if they get people confused or not.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he was of that nature, but quite possible. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, Ryan, you're up. Go get it, brother. How you doing?
Good. As I told Bruce earlier today that I also have two names too, so you can get kind of confused, I guess. If you
Ryan has several aliases. I'm not supposed to say anything further because I'll get a knock on the door. But go on, Ryan. I've said too much. No.
So thank you so much. This is really fascinating.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
I think that I think what you kind of uncovered here too should be taught to a lot of other journalists to kind of like double check their work because there's, again, there's a lot of mistakes in journalism, and a lot of, I've noticed too, a lot of articles they're copied from newspaper to newspaper to newspaper as well.
Yeah. Mhm.
So that's kind of I guess a problem for researchers. And as far as I know about the Civil War veterans, well, I think what you encountered was actually very common. In fact, a lot of deaths during the Civil War, I think, were counted twice. So there's probably
Really?
more. Yeah, there's uh, more deaths are fewer deaths, I should say, and during the Civil War than there actually was. So if that makes any sense. So
Mhm.
they double counted a lot of times. And then secondly, there was a Supreme Court Chief Justice, James White, who also um, this kind of reminded me of him too, because he kind of like exaggerated his Civil War service, and I think it was kind of known at the time, but not really until like after his death too. So I think he died in like 1921.
Yeah.
But this was great. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks everybody for
Yeah, it's
having
been
me
great
here.
stuff this evening. It's been a very, very, very interesting. A lot of twists and turns. This could make a good movie.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we're back Monday, March 10th at 7 p.m. when I have a really, really, really good guest for all of you. SABR member Bailey Hall in her SABR 52 presentation, Which is Worse, a leadoff walk or a leadoff single, will be with us. She took SABR 52 by storm. This is a fantastic presentation. You are not going to want to miss this. The sign-up link is in the SABR events calendar at sabr.org/events and also available in the chapter meeting booklet that is sent out in our Monday message each week. Those who are on the list to get the join the meeting email automatically will get that email over this coming weekend. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org today. Jack Bales, you are fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let's
Thanks
get
a
everybody.
lot.
Yeah, you betcha. Let's get everybody
Thank
out of
you.
here. We'll see you
Okay.
next Monday at
See you
7
next Monday.
o'clock.
Bye.
Have a great night, everybody.
Great night. Mhm.